Let's open with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, as we read about Saul and David and Abigail and Nabal, Lord, give us wisdom. Help us to act as you have called us to, according to the scriptures. And Lord, where we have fallen short, where we have sinned, lead us to repent, lead us to trust in Jesus Christ our Savior. For it is in his name we pray. Amen. All right, 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 1. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. I'm going to pause there. One thing that comes up quite a bit nowadays, especially because so often lots of folks, the only time they're in church is for funerals these days, it seems like. And so funerals become this discussion in the church quite a bit of what is a proper funeral and what is fitting at a funeral and what's not fitting at a funeral. And the Bible gives us precious little to go on for that. We usually hear about burial customs and it will just say something like, so-and-so was gathered to his fathers, or they buried him here or there. And there's not actually a whole lot that we get about funerals. Here we do see, someone points it out, this is sort of the only time we see all of Israel assembled to mourn for one person. It's very difficult ever since the day of Judges to get all of Israel assembled to do anything. They won't go to war together. They won't gather for this or that. They won't even go to the right places of worship. So the fact that Samuel dies and all Israel gathered together and mourned, that is a significant point. So it shows Samuel's prominence and his place as a prophet, as a judge of God's people. And it shows us that it's something to be remembered, something remarkable when someone like Samuel serves for that long. Throughout the history of the Bible, I mean, we have constantly leaders falling, leaders being on an ascent and doing very well, and then something tragic or catastrophic happens. I mean, just think of the people who trained Samuel, like Eli and Eli's sons, right? And how they fell into sin. So it's always a celebration when someone like Samuel passes without a great controversy or shaming. So they honor him for all that he's done in the faith. And they buried him in his house at Ramah. Now, I don't think that is a literal statement. I think the idea is that he set up his house there. I don't think he was buried like under the floorboards. But the idea is that, he's gathered at this place at Ramah, and that's where everyone gathers. And this sort of implies that not only David's there, but that Saul would be there as well. And so people have speculated that this is kind of one of those truce moments where they come together and they aren't at each other's throats. And we get in the following part of the verse where it says, then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. That kind of suggests that he was there for the funeral and then he departed. All right, so David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran, and there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. All right, a couple things to note here so far. So David goes down, and he's going down to sort of the southernmost region to be as far away from Saul as he can be, right? There's just some wisdom here for us in life. Sometimes people in church or in a community don't get along together. And so what's the wise thing to do? Don't sit next to each other in church, Put a little distance between you. If two people are on a committee and they can't stand each other, then maybe it's time for one of them to, go this way or that way. Sometimes that happens in the church. Even people, so he puts some distance between himself and Saul. But he's going and he's still he's still defending God's people as a king. And so he goes down to this place and we find this man, Nabal. Now, there's going to be a bunch of jokes in this chapter that you're probably going to miss And everyone would probably miss after, the Masoretic text is sealed of Hebrew. So how can I explain this without putting everyone to sleep? So the guy's name is Nabal. In Hebrew, that's 3 letters, the Nun, the Beth, and the Lamech. So it's the NBL, let's say. And the vowel pointings, like the vowels that go in between, are something that you would say but not necessarily write down. And the vowels in Hebrew are almost like, they're just kind of like guttural sounds, and so it's really easy to kind of fudge or change or switch out words based on the vowel. And so there's a lot of humor in the Hebrew Bible where it'll be the same like NBL, but there'll be different words. So you have NBL, and from that you can get noble, you can get fool, you can get bottle, you can get, there's a bunch of different words you can get just using those letters. And so it's kind of like a word game, a play on words. I was trying to come up with a comparison. What?
Anagrams.
Anagrams, yeah, that's the phrase for it. So the closest I could think of is, and I apologize, this is like bizarre and dated, but if you ever saw the old British show with Mrs. Bouquet, who kept telling everyone that her name is, Mrs. Bouquet, but everyone else calls her Mrs. Bucket. Yeah. And she always is insisting, no, it's French, it's Bouquet, right? And other people are just saying, no, it's Bucket. And so it really just juxtaposes that. So Nabal's name, he thinks is noble, but everyone else in the passage is noting that it can mean fool as well, or foolish, someone who's not very intelligent. So we find this out about Nabal. So his parents named him this very close, they didn't have the will our kid be bullied with this name conversation beforehand. They named him Nabal. And then we learn about Abigail, which again is like delights in her father. She has a great name. Nabal, not so much. And we hear about Abigail that she's discerning and beautiful, but Nabal, not so much. He's harsh, he's badly behaved, and he's a Calebite. Now, a Calebite is kind of a tricky description here, because a million Bible points if anyone remembers who Caleb was in the Old Testament.
He was one of the 12 spies, him and Joshua.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Caleb was of Canaanite origin, and so Caleb means like dog. Like he's considered like a foreigner, but he's like the good one. He's the one who's faithful. He's the one who believes in Yahweh. He's one of the spies who says like, let's go, man, we can do this with God. And everyone else is saying like, no, it's way too hard to do what God has called us. So Caleb's a good guy in the Old Testament, but he comes from this group of people that are kind of the bad guys. So Calebite can kind of go either way, right? Like it's, that's the sort of, it's an ambiguous descriptor there. So he's very rich either way. Again, I'll use it as another point against the health and wealth gospel. Was Caleb a good guy? Or, sorry, not Caleb. Was Nabal a good guy? No. Was he rich? Yes. He had a lot of stuff. And so we can't just say that everyone who is wealthy is that because God has blessed them with all this as a reward, or that they've shrewdly earned it all. No, sometimes people who are harsh, badly behaved fools succeed. It just happens. So the Bible tells us. Verse 4, David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son, David. All right. So, very polite descriptor. What's going on here is David is acting as king of Israel. What have kings always been able to collect? Taxes, right? Some form of revenue. What is David's argument here? That he has protected these shepherds. He has protected these men, protected this territory, and so he is owed something. He doesn't even explicitly spell out exactly what they have to provide him. He just sort of says in a very, very polite way. I mean, the Canadian Revenue Agency is not this polite to me when they ask for my money, right? He sends a personal request, would you please give, what you owe, since you haven't given it and it's already kind of overdue. It's a feast day. You probably have a lot of stuff right now. Can you just spare some for me and my men? Very polite. Verse 9, when David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where?" So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. All right, so that's their response. Basically, what is Nabal implying?
He has no idea who these people really are.
Yeah.
If they're telling the truth or not.
And then he lies right away, right? Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? Well, if you know he's the son of Jesse, then you know who David is. David would be that most prominent person in your nation right now, embroiled in this political conflict. So a lot of commentators have pointed out that this is the area where Nabal lives is the area where Saul made a big statue to himself and his victory over the Amalekites. So it's a place where Saul is known and acknowledged as king, and so it's kind of like rival territory that David has gone to. And this man has the choice. What is he going to do? Is he going to side with Saul? Is he going to side with David? And he very clearly sides with Saul, which conveniently allows him not to give any of his stuff.
Do you think he would have chosen otherwise if just whoever came first?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. If Saul showed up and asked for stuff, do you think he would have said, well, no, we all know David's the king of Israel? There are times, I don't know, but there are times where people will use an allegedly good reasoning to just do whatever is in their own self-interest, right? And so that happens all the time. So they respond this way. Now, David has been pretty good so far. We remember last time when he delivered that city and then he inquired of the Lord and they said, oh, this city is going to betray you the first chance they get. And David leaves them. He doesn't destroy them. But here we see David, like all of us, has kind of a fuse. It does exist. And here we're going to hear what he has to say. So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, every man strap on his sword, and every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us both by night and by day. All the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him. Yikes. All right, so what's this shepherd saying?
He told him how Nabal had responded and David was going to go and kill them all. Right?
Yeah. So they're really frustrated, right? Because they're saying, these guys did everything they're asking is totally fair, and now we're all going to die because Nabal is, a worthless fellow. It's pretty strong words to use of his master, but it's true, right? And so here we get this, another picture of what happens when there's bad leadership. What happens when there is someone who's the head of the household, Nabal is, and what does he do? He brings destruction on his entire house. And so it's one of those questions of what do you do? What does the Bible model for us is the correct response? Should all of them just said, well, that's what the master said, and then just submit to their death, or should they question it?
Now, if Nabal had heard this servant go to Abigail, would Nabal punish him?
Yeah, I mean, he could be put to death for speaking that way about his master, for sure. So it's pretty harsh what he's saying. But it seems like everyone kind of knows already that he is this inept man. It's funny how a lot of people don't realize, they might have an image of themselves as the very proud and the arrogant in the world, that they are very important and very dignified. And yet we see all the people below them know they don't have a clue, right? It's, oh man, so many different jobs I've had before I'm being reminded of, as probably you are. But let's go on and read what Abigail does. Verse 18, then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys. These people are rich. These people are loaded. They have a lot of stuff sitting around. And Abigail just takes all of this. Verse 19, and she said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I come after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. And he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. Now it is interesting. What does David make his oath based on?
All the good he did.
On himself, right? God do so to the enemies of David, right? So there are times where people sin against David, and they're actually sinning against Yahweh. They're sinning against the Lord, because David is acting as, the anointed one. And there are times where people are just being rude to David as David, right? And so this, again, is this gray area of, is David sinning by making this vow that he's going to go and kill everyone? Commentators disagree. Some say, well, no, he's doing this because, he's dishonored the Lord's anointed in the same way that David said he wouldn't attack Saul because Saul was the Lord's anointed. David is just doing what he needs to do. And other people are saying, well, David probably could just go in and take the food without killing every person there. And there is this whole thing about life being precious, and just taking it on the basis of dishonor maybe isn't really something we want to keep extending, since the Bible says an eye for an eye, and they didn't really kill any of his. So it's a debate. You can examine that in your conscience and spirit and examine what you think of it. But David makes this vow. Verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant. For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, The life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord taking vengeance himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. Long speech. Actually, the longest speech in all of the Old Testament that a woman is given or recorded as having given, if you discount the Song of Deborah, because it's technically the Song of Deborah and Barak. It's like a Hall & Oates thing. People debate who authored how much of which. But in any case, a giant speech given by Abigail. I think Abigail is the Christ-like figure here because she's the one who takes the guilt of the guilty upon herself, right? She says it's her fault. Is that true? No. She was just there doing her job, but now she has gone and has said, I will take the guilt, I will take the punishment. And so she, the innocent, has taken the punishment, or offered herself up for the guilty, and she's bowed down. She's acknowledging David as king, right? Because she's bowed down to the ground as you would bow down to your king. So she's doing all the right stuff. Anything strike you about this speech that Abigail gives?
Yeah, because when you said before, they were debating whether David was doing it for his sake.
Yeah.
She realizes that it was for David. He's doing this.
Yeah.
You don't want to do this and kill all these people for no reason.
Yeah. Abigail's one of the most brilliant moral theologians in the Bible. She has an incredible discernment here that she shows David, and David learns from her that, he actually is doing wrong, right? Because what is her argument that she makes, basically? Well, first of all, she says it's my fault, so don't punish him. Second of all, I'm paying you homage as you would pay a king homage. Thirdly, I'm giving you all of the things that you could want and more, right? Lots and lots of food. She's asking for forgiveness. She acknowledges that Yahweh will certainly make you, David, a sure house, and that you are fighting the battles of Yahweh. You are fighting the battles of the Lord. She reminds him of that. Sometimes it's good to remind people of what they're called to do, right? You wouldn't want to do that, boss, because the company asks us to, do this and make a log of all of this, and you know that, right? Sometimes people need to be reminded of the clear rules of right and wrong, and you can do that in a way without attacking them, and that's what makes Abigail such a brilliant and winsome expositor of God's law here. And she is saying, who's in charge of who lives and dies ultimately in life? The Lord, right? Yahweh. So she's reminding her of that, saying, God's the one who decides who lives and dies. David, let God have vengeance, right? If what you're doing is really carrying out God's justice, let God have justice, right? And Abigail knows quite a bit about David. And oh man, there's so much to say here. The first really clever thing is she does that pun with Nabal's name, right? Where she says the vowels differently and says basically like, his name's Nabal after all, like wink, wink. And so she uses humor, she uses wisdom, and she acknowledges all that David has done, right? David has been serving as a king for all this time. And how many people have actually acknowledged what he's done? Basically no one, right? No one is really acknowledging all the things that David has done. She's acknowledging all that he's done, and she even uses this verse 30, or verse 29, and the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. Why do you think she said that? David and Goliath, right? She's referencing his greatest hits, right? She's saying, just like you slung that stone, Yahweh can sling the ball as far as he can throw him, right? Yahweh can take care of your enemies and will do so. And then she makes this really, really clever argument in verse 31 where she says, we all know that as God promised, you're going to be prince one day. And when you're prince one day, you don't want to look back at the end of your life and remember those things you did in anger, right? You don't want to look back and there'll be blood on your hands for all that you did. And this is asking a lot out of my hearers and a lot of Bible trivia here, but I think the reason this is almost prophetic is, does anyone remember why David wasn't allowed to build Yahweh's temple? He was a man of blood, right? Exactly that. God says, you're a man of blood. Solomon will build my temple. And so Abigail, in a sense, I think is here kind of trying to warn him, in a sense, don't be a man of blood. Don't be, in a weird way, she's almost warning him about all the things that are going to happen with Uriah later. David, watch that temper, watch this way that you're acting, because you don't want to become a man of blood. And it's just,
Will have been one of the people he would have slaughtered?
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, it's a good question whether she would have been spared or not, because if David was acting, devoting everything to destruction as Yahweh had the Canaanites, then yes, she would be destroyed. But if he wasn't given that instruction. He wasn't given that instruction, though, by God, you're right. And if he was acting out of his own honor, and he was really ultimately just trying to get food and stuff for the men, then yeah, he probably would have just killed the men, and then the women would have been given to his soldiers. So yeah, there's another way that Abigail could have also, that's the other thing. Abigail has a lot of choices in this moment where she's warned by these shepherds, right? She can say with the shepherds, all right, let's get out of here with as much as we can, right? She could go and say, hey, here's the key to the back of, Nabal's house. Let's go kill him together. Or, there's a lot of different things she could have done, but she actually does the most difficult thing by taking on the guilt of the people, or of Nabal really individually, and offering herself. And she does so trusting that David is going to do the right thing. Because all of this really hinges on David hearing her words, listening to her, and trusting her. And that's a lot. It could all be a ruse too, right? It could be a double cross. Nabal could have soldiers ready, and David has to trust her. Of course, he could have just said, why is this woman talking to me? But the fact that David listens to her and all that she says tells us a lot about David as well. Verse 32, and David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from avenging myself with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning, there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and said to her, go up in peace. Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition. All right, so a lot there. We see David, when he is confronted with his sin by Abigail, he doesn't say, how dare you speak up to me? He doesn't say, no, I was right, and double down. What does he do? He repents. He acknowledges that he's the problem. That's something Saul doesn't do, right? That's something bad leaders don't do. David acknowledges it, and he doesn't just verbally acknowledge it. He actually thanks her. He blesses her. He actually says that she has been called by Yahweh to speak these words, which is noteworthy, and that he gives her his peace, right? And that isn't just saying have a nice day. That's saying, I'm not going to kill you, right? That's, my peace will rest on your house, basically. So Abigail, another one of these interesting cases where I've said before that the Bible gives us a messy version of things. Abigail is clearly acknowledged as having done the right thing and done the honorable thing. And yet, on the other hand, you could say, well, she was disobedient to her husband. She pulled rank. She called her husband a fool when, Sarah was praised for calling Abraham my Lord. So the Bible presents us with a much messier picture sometimes of human life and how things become messy when there's sinners involved, and how life is so much more complicated at times. And so she's in a difficult position. She does the right thing. And I don't want to run out the clock here. Let's see what happens to complete the story. Verse 36. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord, who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head. Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife. And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Galim. All right. So how does this conclude then? Yeah, man, a lot of, and again, we see the complications of it's not, just perfectly black and white. David's doing stuff that, as, was pointed out from Deuteronomy, kings were advised not to do, which was to take multiple wives, right? So we see this mix.
Wasn't, and Michal, was taken from David.
Yeah.
Saul reneged on his
pledge. You don't get to do that, right? So we see how messy things are in the Bible. And I don't say this to be giddy at controversy. I say it to comfort you, because as we look at our own lives and the messiness and these bad situations in families and in communities, and we might think, oh man, we are so lost, we are so far gone. And it's true that we are sinners, but we are comforted by the gospel truth that God goes to people who are in messy situations. God speaks to them, he forgives them, he shares his word with them, he has fellowship with them. And that's a comfort to you and to me as we're in the messy, sinful situations of life. It lets us know that we're not beyond hope. So there's a couple more plays on words here, which again, we should be if we were reading in Hebrew, we would be laughing at this, right? So first of all, the first joke in verse 36 is, Nabal the fool is feasting like a king. Now, David's actually the king, and he's supposed to be, feasting like a king. And so it shows us again that in life, things aren't fair, right?
Fool and noble.
Yeah, fool and noble together. There's
one picture.
Yeah, there's a lot of comedy here. So there's that. Then, he's really merry, like an idiot because he's drunk, right? He's acting like a fool. And Abigail, in her wisdom, doesn't tell him all of the stuff, doesn't go to him in this moment and say everything to him. And then there's another play on words, because Nabal can also mean bottle in Hebrew. And so when does she talk to him? Well, when his bottle is empty, right? When the wine has gone out of this bottle, Nabal, then she tells him all of this stuff. And then there's a lot of speculation, but it says his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. So
Had like a stroke.
that's what most commentators will say. He had a stroke, and 10 days later, he finally is struck, and he dies. And is it shock because he's lost this stuff? Is it fear because now he's worried, oh no, we've helped out David, and Saul killed all those priests of Nob, and he's probably going to kill us too. Whatever the case, however it's done, the who is that the Lord struck Nabal and died.
Now, the Lord took care of it and struck Nabal.
Yes.
But all those soldiers are safe.
Yeah, all those men are safe, and that's...
David had taken
Yeah.
in his own hands, all of those people would be dead.
All those people would be dead, and all of those innocent people who would have probably told their master, no, don't do that. They're spared. So God does things more justly than we do things, right?
More precise.
More precisely, too, yeah. Yeah, and so God's able to do it rightly. And so Abigail is, in a sense, a prophetess. She prophesied that, God is able to strike down, and he did. And when Nabal is dead, David acknowledges that God has done this and, returned the evil. So this is a warning for all of us, for me especially as someone who has to speak a lot. Be careful what you say, because your words can have consequences, right? Your words can come back to haunt you. Your words can, bring guilt and damage upon your head. We always are instructed by the Bible to be slow to speak, right? Think about what we speak. Be a man of few words. The Bible says, with much words comes all sorts of ignorance, but, be a person of few words. Weigh your words carefully. That's the lesson we're seeing here. So we see the justice of God. We see the mercy of God as well. And then we see the grace of God. So Abigail is there, and now she's in a really difficult spot. She's in a difficult spot because everyone in the community would know, oh, here's Abigail. She was an unfaithful wife, right? She turned on her husband. Bless his heart, he just, it was too much for him to deal with her. And now she's sort of on her own, right? She's in a difficult spot as a woman who can't really own property or anything like that. She's a widow. And how does God show grace to her? Well, David proposes to her, and so she's going to be taken in as a wife of the king, which is a gesture of mercy. We see that Abigail, she's protected, she's cared for, she has these servants that go with her, and she's humble. Unlike Nabal, who was very careless with his words, she either had to adapt to him and become doubly good with her words, or she just naturally is very good with her words. She says, I'm a slave, I'm a handmaiden, I'm not worthy to wash the feet of David's slaves, and yet he's giving me this honor. So she's able to speak very eloquently and with humility. And so David takes her as a wife. Now, this is one of those questions of, if she's so great, if she's so holy, why isn't David satisfied with her as a wife? Why does he take more women, right? We do see this because men is probably the simplest explanation. Men are gross. David does some gross things in his old age too, where he, as he's on his deathbed, he asks for, another teenage girl to be his wife and to lay with him. So it's like there is that problem that David has, and we're going to see it later, that that's David's weak point too, is in this area of women. And he has this excuse, right? As pointed out earlier, Saul does something terrible to him. Saul takes his daughter, who he's already legally married to, and what does he do? Gives Michal to some other man, I believe a foreigner. I need to double check on that. But the idea is sort of like it's an insult, right? It's saying, Saul's taking back that. A lot of commentators and scholars will say, well, he was probably doing that because as he got more afraid of David becoming king, he's trying to sever any ties between his royal lineage and David's family, and so Michal is one of those ways that he could kind of like William of Orange be like, well, I'm the son-in-law of the king, so I can come in and take over. That's being taken from David, and so it's totally wrong that happens, but it does. Yeah, Michal isn't given a choice, right? She's just, yeah.
Wouldn't she have been like on that note, like considered David's property at that point?
Yeah.
So would this also be theft?
Yeah, and David's gonna take her back later, and it's not gonna help out Palti, son of Laish, but he does this too.
And then at this point, would she have had any children from David that would continue the line?
Exactly, yeah. They give lists later of all of David's children and his wives, and it's kind of hard to keep track of all of them because there's a few, but this has nothing to do with Bible study, but I remember that was one of our tests in seminary I think we had to name 3 of David's wives. So Abigail's the easy one to remember. Just to see if you were actually reading.
To give them fun little nicknames?
No, we had to name them and give descriptions of how they were involved in all of this. All right, any other questions as we go or comments on all that Abigail says? And she's a lovely character in our passage here. Lots to admire. Chapter 26, verse 1. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, Is not David hiding himself on the hill of Hachilah, which is on the east of Jeshimon? So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, with 3,000 chosen men of Israel, to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is beside the road on the east of Jeshimon. But David remained in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learned that Saul had come. Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was laying in the encampment while the army was encamped around him. All right, I'm going to pause just to make a couple comments. The interesting thing is that Saul has already said that he's not going to pursue David anymore. He's not going to go and hunt him. He's made this promise a few times. But what happens? Saul is hiding out back at home, back in mom's basement in Gibeah. And then what happens? Who shows up? Well, their name can be hard to pronounce. So the Ziphites. So other people come and give Saul this temptation, right? This is why the Bible talks about the near occasion of sin. And this happens with David later himself. When he's supposed to be off fighting wars, he's sitting at home on his rooftop spying on the ladies, right? And this is what happens with Saul. He's supposed to be going out and being a king, and he's hiding back at home, and temptation comes, right? Temptations this time comes not in the form of lust, but of wrath, right? Of anger. And so these guys come to Saul and sort of start saying to him, hey, we know that you like chasing David down. We have some information for you. And this is how we have to be careful as Christians to avoid the near occasion of sin. And we have to be careful because when we establish these sinful patterns, other people notice them, right? If you've ever talked to someone who's an alcoholic who was a very lively alcoholic, it's really hard to get sober because everyone comes by at Christmas with a bottle, right? Everyone remembers, oh, there's this person, he loves the sauce. And so there's always going to be this temptation of, oh, come on, have a drink with me. This happens in our lives. And it's one of those problems where sin begets sin, where people know our sinful proclivities and then they tempt us. And it becomes harder and harder, especially when we're not doing those things we're called to do. And so Saul caves and he goes. And he camps there, and Abner's there. We remember Abner is Saul's uncle. He's the guy who usually fights battles for Saul. He's the tough guy. And everyone's sleeping all around Saul to protect him. But David is clearly watched by God because David's able to basically just walk right in and no one no one catches him. Verse 6, I think we were at. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Joab's brother, Abishai the son of Zeruiah, who will go down with me into the camp of Saul, the camp to Saul? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. Then said Abishai to David, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take now the spear that is at his head and the jar of water, and let us go. So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. Then David went over to the other side and stood far off on the top of the hill, with a great space between them. And David called to the army and to Abner the son of Ner, saying, will you not answer, Abner? Then Abner answered, who are you who calls to the king? And David said to Abner, are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king, your lord. The thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is and the jar of water that was at his head. Saul recognized David's voice and said, is this your voice, my son David? And David said, it is my voice, my lord, O king. And he said, why does my lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now therefore let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Now therefore let not my blood fall to the earth, away from the presence of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly, and have made a great mistake. And David answered and said, here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. All right. Lots to discuss here. Interestingly enough, David gets the same sort of temptation that Saul does, right? He gets the temptation to kill Saul. And it's one of those tough moments because I at least could see it going just as simply as, and David took Saul's spear and struck him down, and that was God giving, him into his hand. But David has learned the lesson. He's learned the lesson from Nabal of, God can strike down who he wants to strike down. I shouldn't take this myself. It's an interesting kind of counterfactual I wonder about I wonder if David had slayed all of Nabal's men who were Israelites, if Saul would have then had a just cause of said, I left David alone, but he's killing our countrymen, and so I have to act in vengeance, like I have to carry out justice. Saul would have had an excuse then, but he doesn't now. And so David goes there, and David notices that Abner there's no one even staying awake to defend Saul. So this is twofold. First of all, the Lord has caused a deep sleep to go over everyone. And second of all, I think it's kind of a sign that, like, no one really likes Saul that much. No one's staying awake to defend him, right? No one's mourning whether he passed or not. That's a couple things. The other thing that's interesting is that David, the person he attacks, is not Saul, first of all, but Abner. He's saying, don't you know your job? You're supposed to stay awake. In the ancient world, if a soldier who was on night watch fell asleep on duty, they would be killed. That happened, the Romans did that. That happened all throughout the ancient world. The idea is, if you're on that position, the other people aren't able to sleep unless they know someone is staying awake. So if that person stays awake, that jeopardizes all the sleep of all of your soldiers, right? What?
You said stays awake.
Oh, did I? Whoops. Yeah. Sorry, reverse it. So yeah, you have to have a watchman who stays awake so that everyone else can sleep. Otherwise, you have an army that can't sleep because they're worried they're going to get attacked at night. So he calls out Abner. He again reiterates that even though Saul has done all this, he is still the Lord's anointed, which kind of begs the question of why hasn't God taken out Saul yet? But God has his own purposes, and we'll see it all unfold. And then Saul, you do see some repentance. He's showing a little bit of repentance. Yeah, he's heard that story before. So David, again, is smart. David doesn't say, oh, okay, I'll come back home with you. Have you seen McCall? No, he goes back to his own place, right? He knows better than to trust Saul, even though Saul is the Lord's anointed. So again, it's this murky situation where he's acknowledging that he's the king, but he's also still kind of... in a sense, dishonoring him by, at least taking his spear and his water bottle. The water bottle kind of adds a little bit of insult to injury, doesn't it? It's like, well, I'm going to take away your life-giving, I think it's just to kind of prove I was this near, right? Like, I could have done all of this to you, but I didn't.
Parallels with the story of the cave.
Yeah, right. He cuts the... And it's also interesting that Saul is so obsessed with his spear. This is the spear he's thrown at David before, right? He tried to pin him to the wall with it. And there's also, as Christians, this should be setting off huge alarm bells for us, because when we think about messianic prophecy, it's not just those occasions where, one of the prophets says, the Messiah will do this, that, and the other thing. It's also the way that history kind of rhymes. Because when he's saying, will I put out my hand against the Lord's anointed, we still translate it as anointed. You could just as fairly translate it as the Lord's Christ, because Christ means the anointed one, right? So he's saying, will I drive a spear into the Christ? And for us as Christians, that should be setting off alarm bells of, oh, of course, Christ is crucified by sinners. They pierce him with a spear. And David saying, no, that's such dishonor. You would never do that to the Christ. And what does sinful man do to Jesus? Exactly that. Literally that, right? So it's all pointing out. It's supposed to be showing us all throughout the Old Testament that everything is leading to Jesus, right? Everything is pointing us to the Christ. And here we see that as well. A lot to pick up here in David's speech. Again, his humility, his honesty. He calls himself a flea and not worth, Saul's contempt. And in a sense, he's also calling Saul to repent too, because he's saying, don't you have better things to do? Aren't you supposed to be acting as king, and you're not doing any of that, right? Saul makes kind of a confession. But again, not really a full confession. He makes a little bit of an apology, and none of his repentance really goes to the Lord. It's just kind of Sorry, David. And David again tries to teach him, you know, the Lord rewards every man for his righteousness, i.e. do the right thing, Saul. You know how God works. But Saul doesn't really talk about the Lord a whole lot.
I don't think the Bible shows Saul doing anything of importance at any time.
You know, there's a few things he does. Like he does some of the, I mean, the first thing I'd say Saul does is Saul shames Israel, because when they ask for a king, he picks Saul as a king because they said, we'll take anyone. And God says, really, anyone? Okay, I'll take this guy from the most hated town, from the most hated family and the most hated group, and I'll make him your king. And you'll see the difference between having Yahweh as your king and having this guy as your king. So yeah, but no, you're right. He's not really a great one. There's not a lot of highlights we can look back on Saul's reign of him doing the right thing. Yeah. Any other questions about Saul, comments before we wrap for a little bit? Yeah, I think we're shown through all of this again. We're pointed to Jesus. We're pointed to God has selected David's line to be the line of the Christ. This is the man whose earthly line will be chosen, and David is faithful in much of what he does. And when he's wrong, he admits that he's wrong. He confesses that he's wrong. And so we're shown the character of David, and it's a model for us. It's a reminder of God's righteousness, but also of his mercy, because even where David sins, he confesses and he is forgiven. All right, let's pause there.